I hate Mondays. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays don't exactly thrill me either. At North Shore Insurance, all days are like twins. The same faces, the same problems, the same endless calls from irate customers. 5 years. 5 years I'd spent in that gray open space, partitioned into tiny cubicles, listening to other people's stories of flooded basements, wrecked cars, and unexpected medical bills. "Harlow, come in here." The voice of Leon Malone, my immediate supervisor, cut through the morning routine, making me choke on my coffee from the machine. Leon had been the manager of the customer service department for 8 years. A short man with balding hair and sweaty palms, he compensated for his unremarkable appearance with an inexplicable love of expensive ties and a habit of speaking to his subordinates in the tone of a strict teacher. He noticed me in about my 3rd year of employment when I suggested a change in the standard script for communicating with customers, which resulted in a 12% increase in his satisfaction rating. Since then, I became his favorite workhorse. Indispensable, but not worthy of promotion. "Have a seat." Leon pointed to the chair across from his desk, which was littered with folders and printouts. "We have a problem with the Brighton Group. They're complaining about late payments again. Sort it out." It wasn't a request. It was an order. The Brighton Group, 4 small companies that had banded together to take out corporate insurance, was a constant headache for the department. Their director, Malcolm Brighton, called with complaints on a weekly basis. "But I thought Jenny was handling their case," I objected cautiously. "Jenny's on vacation. And anyway, you're better at calming troubled clients." Leon leaned back in his chair. "Oh, and don't forget about the anniversary dinner this Friday. Attendance is mandatory. Mr. Coleman wants to see all the employees." I nodded and returned to my desk. My monitor was already flashing a notification of a new request. Opening it, I sighed. Another non-standard situation that didn't fit into our system's algorithms in any way. A client named Warren Gallagher was trying to get an insurance claim for equipment damaged under very unusual circumstances. From the description, his prototype laboratory was located in a building that had partially collapsed due to construction work in the neighborhood. The system automatically rejected his claim because there was no explicit mention of this type of damage in the contract. I spent the morning trying to find a loophole in the system. I studied the contract up and down, checked precedents, even contacted the legal department. Technically, Mr. Gallagher's case fell under the category of externally caused damages, but I had to be able to justify it. On my lunch hour, I decided to call the client for more details. The voice on the other end of the line sounded surprisingly calm for a man who had lost hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment. "Mr. Gallagher, I'm Wendy Harlow from North Shore Insurance. I'm looking into your case, and I'd like to ask you a few questions." "Of course, Miss Harlow," he said, with the confidence of a man accustomed to talking to corporate representatives. "I realize that my case is somewhat unusual." For the next 15 minutes, Mr. Gallagher talked about his project, some kind of innovative platform for streamlining processes in insurance and finance. Most of the technical details passed me by, but I noted that the man was clearly passionate about what he was doing. "One last question, Mr. Gallagher. Do you still have pictures of the damage and documentation of the equipment?" "Of course I do. I'll have everything you need sent over within the hour." When I hung up, Leon materialized behind me. "What kind of amateur hour is this?" His voice was quiet, but I already knew that tone. A storm was brewing. "I'm working on Mr. Gallagher's application." I tried to keep my voice steady. "He's got an unusual case, but I think we can—" "Unusual!" Leon leaned closer, and I could smell his menthol candy. "Harlow, we discussed this in the briefing last week. No resources for unusual cases. The system rejects it. It rejects it. We've got a quarterly report due, and you're wasting time on some inventor? But his case does fall under the terms of the contract, if you categorize the damages correctly." I felt my cheeks start to burn. "Besides, the amount is substantial, and if we keep wasting time on isolated cases, we're not going to meet our standard claims processing plan," Leon said. "Close this request and take care of the Brighton Group. It's a priority." I watched him walk away toward his office and felt the familiar irritation building inside. 5 years. 5 years of conversations like this. 5 years of feeling like I could do more, but the system wouldn't let me. That evening, as the office emptied, I went back to Mr. Gallagher's request. The photos and documents he sent were more than convincing. I spent another 2 hours formulating a justification for payment and finding a loophole in the damage classification. I ended up filing through an alternate channel that was usually used for special clients with VIP status. I arrived at work on Friday, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. The system showed that Mr. Gallagher's application had been approved and forwarded to the benefits department. Now I just had to hope that Leon wouldn't notice my little diversion. The day passed with the usual hustle and bustle, calls, emails, disgruntled clients. By evening, I was already dreaming of a hot bath and a glass of wine, but there was still the corporate dinner to come. North Shore Insurance was celebrating its 30th anniversary, and management had rented Lakeview, one of Evanston's most expensive restaurants. I wore my only decent black dress, bought on sale 2 years ago, and low-heeled shoes. My blonde hair, usually pulled back into a practical ponytail, was loose and slightly upswept. Nothing fancy, but it would do for an office event. The restaurant greeted me with dim lights and soft jazz music. Tables covered with snow-white tablecloths were arranged in a semicircle around a small stage. Colleagues had already gathered in groups, sipping champagne and exchanging office gossip. "Wendy!" Martha called out to me from accounting. "Come here!" I made my way across the room, greeting familiar faces. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Leon, who was having a lively discussion with our general manager, Mr. Coleman. Judging by their gestures and smiles, the conversation was pleasant. That was a good sign. Perhaps Leon would be too busy to pay attention to me today. "How are things going with the Brighton group?" Martha asked as I joined their table. "It's all sorted." I took a sip of champagne. Turns out the problem had been incorrectly filled out forms. "What about that weird case?" Eric from the neighboring department joined the conversation. "I hear you've taken on some complicated application." I tensed up. Office rumors spread faster than a fire. "It's no big deal." I tried to deflect the conversation. "By the way, have you seen the new ad campaign? They finally decided to—" My monologue was interrupted by the clinking of glasses. Mr. Coleman called for attention. An elderly man with graying temples and a good-natured smile, he looked like a classic director from advertising brochures. After the formal speeches and the presentation of commemorative badges, dinner began. I was just enjoying a medium-rare steak when Leon approached our table. His face was unnaturally red, either from alcohol or anger. "Harlow, can I talk to you for a minute?" His tone didn't bode well. I apologized to my colleagues and followed him. Leon stopped a few feet from our table, but not far enough away to keep the conversation private. "Did you approve of Gallagher's statement?" he asked without preamble. "After my express prohibition?" I felt my heart start to beat faster. "His case does fall under the terms of the insurance," I tried to say calmly. "I found the right classification, and the system—" "The system?" Leon raised his voice, and several heads turned in our direction. "You bypassed standard procedure. You used a VIP channel for an ordinary client." But his case wasn't ordinary. I felt myself getting angry. 5 years of subjugation, 5 years of restraint. "If you just look at the paperwork, don't you dare tell me what to do!" Leon was practically shouting now, and the chatter at the neighboring tables had died down. "That's exactly what I said about you at your last performance review. You're not a team player, Harlow. You think you're smarter than everyone else. But you know what? You're just an incompetent employee who can't follow the simplest of instructions." The restaurant fell into an awkward silence. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me, sympathetic, curious, gloating. The blood rushed to my cheeks and my hands began to tremble. "If I'm incompetent, why do you keep passing the most difficult cases on to me?" The words came out before I could think them through. "Why are my customer satisfaction scores higher than the rest of the department?" Leon's face contorted with rage. "That's your true character." He pointed his finger in my direction. "Always thinking of yourself. You know what, Harlow? You're fired. Right now. Don't come by on Monday to pick up your stuff. It'll be delivered to you by courier." It was like the world around me slowed down. I heard Martha gasp. I heard someone at the far table whisper, Wow! I heard a fork drop out of someone's hands. 5 years on the job, and this is how it ends. Public humiliation in a crowded restaurant. If you'll excuse me, came a calm male voice from outside. I'd like to clarify the situation. I turned around and saw a middle-aged man sitting at a neighboring table. He was tall, with a streak in his dark hair and attentive gray eyes. He looked absolutely out of place among our corporate bustle. And who are you? Leon clearly hadn't expected the intrusion of an outsider. Warren Gallagher, the man introduced himself, and I felt my stomach clench. The client whose statement had caused this whole scene just happened to be here. The same client with the unusual case. And I have to say, Miss Harlow is the only member of your company who actually looked into the situation and found a solution. Leon blinked, his anger replaced by confusion. Mr. Gallagher, this is an internal company matter, and I'd prefer to… You know. Warren got up from his desk and walked over to me. I've been testing the efficiency of customer service at several insurance companies for my new project, and I have to say, incompetent people don't solve problems the way Miss Harlow did. He pulled a business card from his inside jacket pocket and held it out to me. If you're interested in a job that values initiative and thinking outside the box, call me on Monday, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Incompetent people can't see a solution where the system says no. I took the card, feeling like a character in some surreal movie. On the white rectangle in gold letters was engraved, Warren Gallagher, founder and CEO, Gallagher Ventures. I spent the weekend after my layoff in a strange daze. Mixed feelings, relief, fear, anger, confusion, alternated every few minutes, making it impossible to focus on anything in particular. I stared up at the ceiling of my small apartment, pondering how quickly one could lose what seemed immutable, however unsatisfying. Warren Gallagher's business card lay on the coffee table, its gold embossing glistening in the morning sunlight. I picked it up several times, studying the smooth surface as if it could answer all my questions. Was it worth the call? Wasn't this just a gesture of courtesy, or worse, a public humiliation of Leon in which I was an accidental instrument? By Sunday evening, my refrigerator was empty, and the need to go grocery shopping dragged me out of the apartment. At the supermarket, I was mechanically putting the usual groceries into my shopping cart when I heard a familiar voice. Miss Harlow? I turned around and saw Martha from accounting. Her usually neat hair was disheveled, and her eyes were sympathetic. Hi, Martha. I tried to smile. How are things at the office? Everyone's talking about Friday. She lowered her voice, even though no one was around. Leon's trying to make it look like you've been a problem employee for a long time, but a lot of people are on your side, especially after that imposing man stood up for you. I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. The client who started it all, I muttered. Ironic. Are you going to call him? Martha nodded at my bag, as if she could see through it to the business card I'd decided to take with me at the last minute. I don't know, I answered honestly. He's a venture capitalist, Martha. What can I do in a world like that? I'm just an insurance claims specialist. Who was able to get around the system when necessary, she remarked. Look, Wendy, we're not close friends, but I've always thought you deserved better than North Shore. Call him. With those words, she squeezed my shoulder and headed for the register, leaving me alone with frozen convenience foods and the growing feeling that I was standing on the edge of a cliff. On Monday morning, when I normally would have been in the office by now, I sat in the kitchen looking at my phone. The clock read 9:30, a perfectly good time for a business call. 3 times I dialed the number from my business card, and 3 times I dropped it before the first dial tone sounded. Finally, taking a deep breath, I pressed the call button and put the phone to my ear. Gallagher. A deep voice answered after the second ringtone. Hello? My voice sounded higher than usual. This is Wendy Harlow, former North Shore insurance specialist. We met Friday night under unusual circumstances. A second pause and then, Miss Harlow. I'm glad you called. I was beginning to think I'd missed out on a valuable employee. His tone was friendly, without the condescension I'd expected from a man in his position. About your offer? I began, not quite sure what I wanted to say. Let's discuss it over coffee, he suggested. I don't suppose you have any other plans today? I grinned involuntarily. My social life had never been very busy, and not since I'd been fired. Yes, I'm free. Oh, that's great. You know the Brew Point on Church Street? Let's meet there at 11 o'clock. Brew Point was a cozy coffee shop with brick walls and big windows. Despite the morning hour, the place wasn't crowded. A couple of students with laptops and a few businessmen holding informal meetings. Warren was already waiting at a table in the corner with a laptop and 2 cups of coffee. I took the liberty of ordering you a latte, he said as I sat down across from him. I hope you don't mind. Thank you. I wrapped my hands around the cup, feeling the pleasant warmth. I had to admit, I wasn't quite sure why you'd asked me to meet. Warren leaned back in his chair, studying me with a slight smile. Straightforwardness. Another quality I appreciate. He took a sip of coffee. Let me explain what happened on Friday, and then move on to why I'm here. It wasn't just a random visit to a restaurant. He turned the laptop screen toward me, and I saw a spreadsheet with the names of several insurance companies, including North Shore. Opposite each name were numbers and brief comments. For the past 3 months, I've been testing the customer service systems of the top 5 insurance companies in the Midwest, Warren explained. I submitted identical non-standardized claims, tracked response times, decision efficiency, and communication quality. North Shore was the only company where my case wasn't just automatically rejected, but referred to a specialist for review. I blinked, trying to comprehend what I was hearing. Did you intentionally create a problematic situation? Why? Market research, he shrugged. I founded Gallagher Ventures 10 years ago, and in that time, we've invested in a variety of technology startups. In the last 2 years, I've been particularly interested in the insurtech area, technology for insurance. It's a huge market with outdated processes and systems that can't cope with today's challenges. He showed me some more charts and graphs showing the results of his research. The numbers spoke for themselves. Non-standard cases took an average of 3 times longer to process than standard cases and ended in denial 70% of the time. Was I just part of your experiment? I asked, feeling a strange mixture of disappointment and interest. Initially, yes. Warren looked me straight in the eye. But the way you approached my case went beyond normal customer service. You didn't just follow instructions. You looked for a solution, even when the system and your supervisor said no. That's exactly the type of thinking I need in my new project. He closed his laptop and leaned forward. 6 months ago, I founded a new startup, Flex Claims. We're developing a platform for handling non-standard insurance claims using artificial intelligence and machine learning. The goal is to automate the process, but with a flexibility that current systems lack. And what does this have to do with me? I still didn't understand what he was getting at. I need people who understand the problem from the inside. Warren paused, as if searching for words. Engineers can create great technology, but without an understanding of the actual processes and customer needs, it's useless. You have demonstrated not only your knowledge of the system, but also your ability to find non-standard solutions within existing constraints. This is exactly what our team needs. I felt my heart start to beat faster. He offered me a job? At a tech startup? But I don't know anything about technology, I countered. I don't even know what machine learning is, except that it has something to do with computers. Warren laughed, genuinely, without mockery. Technology can be taught, Miss Harlow. It's much harder to find someone who sees not only the problem, but the possibility of solving it. You have hands-on experience and an understanding of how insurance processes work, what pitfalls exist, and what clients need. That's invaluable to our project. He pulled a folder out of his briefcase and placed it in front of me. Here's the project description, a preliminary job offer, and a non-disclosure agreement. I'm offering you a position as a user experience consultant with the opportunity to grow into a line of business manager. The salary is 30% above what you had at North Shore, plus company stock options. I opened the folder and took a quick look at the documents. The numbers in the salary column made me blink a few times to make sure I wasn't mistaken. Look, Wendy, I understand your concerns. Moving from the corporate world to a startup is always a leap into the unknown. But sometimes the best opportunities come just when we least expect them. I stared at the documents in front of me, feeling the conflict building up inside. On the one hand, the offer seemed too good to be true. On the other, The thought of returning to the world of corporate insurance, finding a new job similar to the previous one, was almost physically repulsive. "Could I have a few days to think about it?" I asked, closing the folder. "Sure," Warren nodded. "Take a week, but no more than that. We're moving fast, and the sooner you join, the better for the project." We ended the meeting by exchanging contacts, and I left the coffee shop with a heavy folder in my hands and even heavier thoughts in my head. Warren's offer opened the door to a whole new world, exciting but frightening in its unknown. At home, I spread the papers out on the kitchen table and read each page carefully. The Flex Claims project did sound impressive. A platform that could revolutionize the handling of complex insurance claims, saving companies and clients time and money. My role would be to advise the technical team on real-world use cases, testing prototypes, and making recommendations to improve the user experience. It sounded both familiar and brand new. I would use my experience from North Shore, but in a completely different context, with more freedom and potential for creativity. That evening I called my mother, the only person whose opinion really mattered to me, even though we didn't always find common ground. "They offered you what?" She questioned me when I told her about the meeting with Warren. "Wendy, that sounds suspicious. Startups are closing every day. What are you going to do if you're out of work in a month?" "I have savings, Mom," I sighed, expecting a similar reaction. "And experience in insurance. I could always find something like North Shore." "But why risk the stability?" I could hear the genuine incomprehension in her voice. "You could just get another full-time job at an insurance company. With your experience, it shouldn't be difficult." I walked over to the window, looking out at the evening lights of Evanston. For 5 years I'd stared at the same view, thinking it was all I could hope for. "Maybe I'm tired of stability that really isn't," I said quietly. "At North Shore, I thought I had a stable job and ended up getting fired at a restaurant in front of all my coworkers." After talking to my mother, I sat on the couch going over the pros and cons in my mind. The fear of the unknown was intense. I had never worked for a technology company, much less a startup. What if I didn't do well? What if my experience proves useless in a new context? What if the company goes bust in 3 months and I find myself out of a job again? On the other hand, 5 years at North Shore had taught me one thing: stability is illusory. I could spend another 5 years at a similar company, doing the same job, making the same paycheck, and end up in the same position I'm in now. What if Warren was right, and I really could be more than just an exec at an insurance company? What if this unexpected twist of fate is a once-in-a-lifetime chance? I picked up Warren's business card, running my finger over the smooth surface. Gallagher Ventures is a company that invests in the future. Perhaps it was time to invest in my own future, too, even if it meant leaping into the unknown. In the morning, I wrote a short message. "Mr. Gallagher, I accept your offer. When should I start work? Sincerely, Wendy Harlow." The reply came a few minutes later. "Great news. Come to the office Thursday, 9 o'clock in the morning. The address is in the paperwork. I look forward to our collaboration, and please call me Warren." The Flex Claims office was located in an old brick former print shop on the edge of Evanston's business district. On this sunny morning, I stood in front of the glass doors, nervously rubbing the strap of the new bag I'd bought for my first day of work. Inside, I was greeted by a spacious lobby with high ceilings and exposed brick walls. After a brief check-in at the reception desk, I went up to the 3rd floor and found myself in a space strikingly different from the austere office corridors of North Shore. No partitions or separate offices. Instead, there was an open area divided into functional zones by furniture and decorative elements. There was a kitchen with an island in the center, work tables along the walls, and a few upholstered chairs around a low table in the corner. Warren, dressed in jeans and a simple dark blue shirt, greeted me and gave me a brief tour. He looked very different today than when we first met, not a trace of business suit. "We're still a small team, but we're growing," he explained as he circled the space where about 10 people worked. Getting to know his colleagues was quick, but it left a strong impression. Zoe Kincaid, the operations director, was a tall woman with a short haircut and a piercing gaze. Her entire appearance, from her austere suit to her thin lip line, spoke of business acumen. Her greeting was formal, with a note of skepticism that she didn't even try to hide. Miles Chung, the product director, a young Asian man with thick-rimmed glasses, greeted me with genuine enthusiasm. His joy at the arrival of someone with insurance experience was almost palpable. And finally, Dexter Nash, a lean man with dark hair gathered in a careless bun. The technical genius, as Warren introduced him, barely took his eyes off his work to nod at me. His aloofness was not so much rudeness as complete immersion in his inner world of code and algorithms. My workstation happened to be by a window overlooking a small patio. Warren explained that I should spend the first week familiarizing myself with the project, and Miles would show me everything they had already done. The next 2 hours flew by in an avalanche of new information. Miles talked about the concept of flex claims, showed prototypes of the interface, and explained how their algorithms should handle non-standard insurance claims. Despite all the technical terminology, the point of the project was simple: to create a system that can flexibly adapt to unique situations instead of automatically rejecting anything that doesn't fit into a rigid framework. By lunchtime, my head was overflowing with information. Miles invited me to the team's joint lunch. Turns out they had a tradition of ordering in on Thursdays. There were many containers with a variety of dishes on a large island. People plated their food and seated themselves in groups, some on bar stools, some on couches. The atmosphere was relaxed, not at all like the North Shore cafeteria, where departments were usually seated separately and the lunch hour rarely exceeded 30 minutes. The conversation flowed smoothly from work matters to a discussion of a new TV series, then to local Evanston news, and back to work. No hierarchy, no formality. It both surprised me and made me a little nervous. At North Shore, everything was structured, predictable. Here, there was creative freedom, bordering on chaos. Unexpectedly, Zoya approached me with a question about the incident at North Shore that had led to my dismissal. Her tone was neutral, but her gaze was evaluative. I sensed that this was a test of sorts. Trying to speak calmly, I explained that I had used an alternate claims processing channel reserved for VIPs, and that technically it was a breach of protocol, but not of company policy. When Zoya asked if I thought I had done the right thing, I firmly replied that I had done what was fair for the client and for the company in the long run. After lunch, my immersion in the project continued. To my surprise, we were joined by Dexter, who until then had seemed to completely ignore my existence. His speech was rapid, his thoughts jumped from one thing to another, and his focus was completely centered on a technical problem. Their algorithm for classifying insurance claims worked with only 65% accuracy. By the end of the day, my head was buzzing with new information and impressions. Warren asked how I felt, and I honestly replied that the day had been informative and off-putting. As I exited the building, I took a deep breath of the cool evening air. My first day at Flex Claims was completely different from my workdays at North Shore. No monotonous meetings, no rigid rules, no stifling hierarchy. Instead, there was energy, creative chaos, and a sense that everyone was truly passionate about what they were doing. But at the same time, I felt dislocated. At North Shore, I knew exactly what my role and responsibilities were. Here, however, the lines were blurred, and I had to find my place. My apartment greeted me with its familiar silence. A one-room apartment with minimalist furnishings and carefully organized space, it reflected my lifestyle. Orderly, predictable, no surprises. On the kitchen table stood a lonely mug of unfinished morning coffee, the only sign of clutter that I didn't usually allow. Dropping my shoes, I pulled a container of yesterday's pasta out of the refrigerator and heated it up in the microwave. The habit of eating alone had long been a part of my life. After my parents divorced and I moved to Evanston to work at North Shore, I had somehow quietly become a classic loner. A few dates arranged by coworkers went nowhere, and then I just stopped trying. The phone rang as I settled with a plate on the couch. Mom, of course. She always called on Thursdays. As soon as I answered, she immediately asked about the first day. Her voice sounded strained, like she was expecting to hear bad news. I briefly replied that the day went well without going into details. Do they even have a proper office? There was no hiding the skepticism in her voice about startups that she considered frivolous ventures for pampered millennials. I told her about the beautiful historic building, but not about the informal atmosphere and lunches together. She went on to ask what kind of people worked there, if there was anyone with normal insurance experience. I explained that it was a technology startup developing a platform for insurance companies and that they needed me because of my experience. "And how long has this company been around?" she continued. "What if they close in a month? You could find a stable job at another insurance company." Feeling irritation building, I interrupted her, reminding her that we had already discussed this and that after North Shore, I needed something new. After a pause, she said, "Okay, I hope you know what you're doing, and remember, you can always come home if something goes wrong." After talking to my mom, I felt a mixture of irritation and guilt. I understood her concern. She had faced financial difficulties herself after her divorce and was eager to shield me from similar experiences. But I wanted support, not doubt. The next morning at Flex Claims began with an unexpected event. Zoya gathered everyone in the conference area and announced that Midwest Insurance was withdrawing from the pilot, believing the platform was not meeting their expectations. A whisper of concern swept through the office. When Zoya asked for my opinion as an insurance professional, I dared to be candid. I explained that the platform seems to be built by people who understand technology, but not insurance. The classification process is overly complicated, and the interface is overloaded with technical details unnecessary for insurance agents. To my surprise, Warren reacted enthusiastically, saying that's why he invited me on the team. To hear the truth, not what they want to hear. Even Zoya, though still serious, asked me to suggest specific improvements. The day flew by in a flurry of meetings and brainstorming sessions. I tried to explain to the programmers how the classification of insurance claims worked in practice. By the evening, I felt exhausted, but strangely energized. For the first time in a long time, my opinion was not just listened to, but taken into account. As I drove home, I reflected on the contrasts between North Shore and Flex Claims. At the corporation, everything was regimented, predictable, but stuffy. At the startup, there was creative chaos bordering on anarchy, but everyone seemed to genuinely believe in a common goal. Would I be able to get used to this new world? Would my habit of structure and order constantly conflict with the chaotic energy of a startup? And most importantly, am I really capable of making a valuable contribution to the project, going far beyond my previous role as an implementer? It's been 2 weeks since I joined the Flex Claims team. The days have flown by at an incredible speed, filled with new information, meetings, and endless discussions. My head felt like a sponge, soaking up terminology, concepts, and principles of the tech world that I was previously unaware of. After Midwest Insurance abandoned the pilot project, Warren assigned me to lead an effort to redesign the platform's user experience. I started by creating 20 typical insurance claim scenarios of varying complexity, which Dexter used to customize his algorithm. I then set about analyzing the interface, identifying all the places where it was becoming too technical and confusing for the average insurance agent. On Friday morning, I presented my report at a general team meeting. I showed examples of the screens I had redesigned, simplifying terminology and reorganizing information according to the logic of insurance processes. Miles was delighted with my suggestions. Warren nodded approvingly, and Zoya, though remaining reserved, recognized the potential for improvement. But when it came to the technical team, I encountered unexpected resistance. "It's going to require a complete overhaul of the application architecture," Dexter said, crossing his arms over his chest. 3 weeks of work, minimum. "But isn't that what the prototype is all about?" I objected. "Identify problems before the product gets to customers?" Dexter looked at me as if I'd suggested I rewrite the Bible. "It's not the prototype. It's the fact that you're proposing to change the fundamental logic of the system. The classification algorithm is the heart of the entire platform." One of the programmers on his team, a young guy with tattoos on his arms, added, "These changes would disrupt the entire database structure. We spent months optimizing it." I felt a chill run down my spine. The technical jargon they were exchanging was almost a foreign language to me. Despite 2 weeks of intense immersion, I was still an outsider in their world. "I understand the complexity," I said, trying to sound confident. "But if we want the product to be used by real insurance companies, It has to fit their workflows, not the other way around. Exactly. Warren suddenly backed me up. Wendy's right. Our goal is not to create a perfect technical system, but to solve real problems of our customers. The meeting ended with a decision to revise the platform architecture, but I felt that I had won not allies, but rather adversaries in the technical team. In their eyes, I was an outsider who didn't understand the real work, programming. After the meeting, Miles approached me with a conspiratorial look. "Don't take it personally," he said. "Dexter and his guys always react that way when someone suggests changing something they've created. It's a defensive reaction. I just want the product to work for the users," I sighed. "And that's right," Miles smiled. "By the way, I have some news that will interest you. Remember when we were discussing new potential customers for the pilot launch?" I nodded, not understanding what he was getting at. Anyway, Zoya had set up a meeting with North Shore Insurance. My heart skipped a beat. "North Shore? My former company?" "Exactly." Miles looked worried. "And Warren wants you to be part of the presentation. Who knows better than you how their processes work?" I felt the room spin slightly around me. The thought of returning to North Shore, of meeting with my former coworkers and possibly Leon, caused a real panic. When is this meeting?" My voice sounded weaker than I wanted it to. 2 weeks. We'll have just enough time to make some of the changes you suggested. 2 weeks. 14 days before I have to go back to the place where I was publicly humiliated and fired. 14 days before I had to face Leon no longer as a subordinate, but as a representative of another company. Just thinking about it made me nauseous. I spent the weekend in a strange state of anxious excitement. On the one hand, the opportunity to represent Flex claims at North Shore was a great chance to prove my worth to the new team. On the other, the fear of public failure and humiliation wouldn't let me go. Sunday night, I called my mom, hoping for support, or at least a distraction from my obsessive thoughts. "North Shore?" she interjected when I told her about the upcoming presentation. "Are you going back there after you got fired so ugly?" "Not back, but I'll be there with a presentation," I clarified. "As part of the Flex Claims team. And that former boss of yours will be there?" "Maybe," I tried to sound nonchalant. "But he has no power over me now." After talking to my mom, I felt a little better. Maybe this presentation was a chance not only for Flex Claims, but for me as well. A chance to turn over a new leaf and prove, first of all to myself, that I could be more than just a performer. The next week was spent working intensely on the prototype. Despite initial resistance, Dexter and his team began to implement some of my suggestions, though not without constant arguments about technical feasibility. We had short meetings every morning to discuss progress and problems that arose. And every time I suggested a change in the interface or logic, the technicians rolled their eyes or exchanged understanding glances, as if I were a child proposing to repaint the Mona Lisa. This was the essence of the conflict. The technicians were striving for a perfect system in terms of algorithms and code, while I was trying to make it practical for real users. 2 worlds, 2 logics, 2 different languages. On Wednesday, Warren called an emergency meeting. It turned out that the meeting with North Shore had been rescheduled for next Wednesday, not 2 weeks later, as originally planned. "We only have 7 days to prepare the presentation and finalize the prototype," he announced. "It's not an easy task, but I have faith in our team." His gaze lingered on me. "Wendy, you're going to have to work extra hard. No one knows North Shore better than you. We need to understand what their pains our product can solve and how to present that properly." I nodded, feeling the tension stiffen my shoulders. Time was catastrophically short, and the stakes were too high. North Shore was a large company, and if they became our client, it would open the door to other insurance giants. The next few days became a blur of endless meetings, finalizing the prototype and preparing the presentation. I worked late into the night, arriving at the office first and leaving last. My refrigerator was empty, and my supply of frozen convenience foods was running low. There was simply no time to buy groceries. Monday night, when the office was empty, I sat at my desk, staring at the monitor screen. The prototype was beginning to take a shape I was happy with, a more intuitive interface, clearer logic, less technical details in plain sight. But still, something felt wrong, unfinished. "Still here?" Dexter's voice made me flinch. I hadn't noticed him approach. "Trying to figure out what's wrong with the grading form," I replied, massaging my overworked eyes. Dexter stared at the screen in silence for a while, then sat down next to me. "Show me what's bothering you." I pointed to the process where the user had to choose from a list of technical options. "Here, an insurance agent will never know all these terms. We need to translate them into language that insurance agents can understand, but I can't find the right wording." Dexter thought for a moment, tapping his fingers on the table. "What if we made it a two-tier system?" he finally said. "The first level is simple questions that the agent can understand. Based on the answers, the system determines the technical parameters and shows them only if the user wants to go into details." I looked at him with surprise. This was exactly what was needed. "That's a great idea," I admitted. "But wouldn't that make the code more complicated?" Dexter shrugged. "A little, but it would solve the interface problem without sacrificing the accuracy of the algorithm. I can have it done by tomorrow morning." "Really?" I couldn't believe my ears. "But you said any changes would take weeks." He smiled slightly, for the first time in my memory. "That was before I saw you working. You really understand what users need." "That's impressive." His admission took me by surprise. All these days, I'd felt like an outsider among techies, and suddenly one of them, the most stubborn and closed-minded of them all, recognized my value. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "It meant a lot to me." On Tuesday, we had a dress rehearsal for the presentation. Warren, Zoya, Miles, and I were to represent flex claims at North Shore. Dexter had implemented a two-tiered classification system, as promised, and it had transformed the interface, making it both easy for beginners and informative for advanced users. Wednesday morning came all too quickly. I put on my best suit, dark blue, austere but elegant, bought especially for the occasion. I put my hair in a neat bun and applied a discreet makeup. The mirror reflected not the insecure Wendy who once sat in the North Shore cage, but a professional presenting an innovative product. At least that's what I tried to convince myself. The North Shore office hadn't changed in the weeks I'd been away. The same gray walls, the same humming fluorescent lights, the same tired faces of the employees. But now I looked at it all with different eyes, as an outside observer, not as part of the system. We were ushered into a conference room on the 12th floor, the same one where I had once presented my ideas for improving customer service, which Leon had systematically ignored. Several people were already seated at the long table, including Mr. Coleman, the CEO, and Leon. When I entered the room with the Flex Claims team, Leon lost his composure for a second. His eyes widened, and his mouth dropped open in mute surprise. He clearly hadn't expected to see me here in another capacity. I nodded at him with a polite smile, trying not to show how my heart was racing. Mr. Coleman rose to greet us. "Mr. Gallagher, nice to finally meet you in person." He shook Warren's hand. Ms. Harlow? What a pleasant surprise." "Mr. Coleman," I shook his hand, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's good to see you again." Leon coughed, drawing attention to himself. "I think we should get started. Time is money, as they say." Warren nodded and started the presentation. He talked about the concept of flex claims, the problems the platform solves, the potential savings in time and resources. Zoya presented the business model and financial aspects. Miles described the technical side and integration with existing systems. And then came my exit. When Warren announced my name, my insides clenched. The moment of truth had arrived. I rose slowly, feeling my knees trembling. The eyes of everyone in the room turned to me, but the hardest part was feeling Leon's eyes on me. There was a mixture of distrust and ill-concealed hostility in them, as if he didn't believe that I was really standing here as a representative of another company. I took a step forward and suddenly felt a strange calmness. All the fears and doubts that had plagued me before the meeting receded. This was my chance not just to present the product, but to prove my worth. "As you know," I began, surprised at my own calm voice, When a client comes in with an unusual problem, the system often just turns them down. The agent has to run to a supervisor, wasting time, and the client waits and gets angry. I cast a brief glance at Leon. He squirmed slightly in his chair, clearly recognizing the hint of our conflict. Our solution works differently, I continued. Instead of rigid frameworks and rules, we've created a system that learns from each case and gets smarter over time. My fingers confidently touched the keyboard, and a prototype appeared on the big screen. I started the demonstration, picking the very case that had gotten me fired. Warren's claim of damaged hardware. A small revenge on Leon, but also a perfect example for a demonstration. As I demonstrated how everything worked, I could feel the mood in the room change. Mr. Coleman stepped forward, clearly interested. The other North Shore representatives were taking notes. Even Leon, though he was trying to keep a stony face, was watching my every move on the screen. It was as if I'd fallen into my stride. All the nights without sleep, the endless arguments with Dexter, the hours I'd spent working on the prototype, it all helped me to speak confidently and knowledgeably now. I no longer felt like an imposter in the world of technology. When I finished the demonstration, I returned to my seat next to Warren. He summarized, emphasizing my experience at North Shore as an asset to the project. I felt a surge of gratitude. He was deliberately singling out my contributions in front of my former colleagues. After a few questions about cost and timing, which Zoya and Miles answered confidently, Leon finally raised his hand. I knew this moment was inevitable. He couldn't pass up the chance to embarrass me. "I have a question for Miss Harlow," he said, with a faint smile that I knew all too well. That smile always portended a catch. "You say the system will allow agents to handle difficult cases without management approval. Wouldn't that lead to disorder and loss of control?" I recognized the implication immediately. It wasn't a question about the product. It was a question about me, about my disobedience, about whether I was teaching others how to circumvent their superiors. He was trying to make me look like a rebel, undermining the authority of management. I took a deep breath, feeling all eyes turn back to me. In that moment, I realized how much I had changed over the weeks. The old Wendy might have been confused or started apologizing, but not now. "Actually, it's the opposite, Mr. Malone," I replied, looking him straight in the eye with a confidence I didn't have before. "Our system makes the process clearer and more transparent. Managers see every decision and the rationale behind it. You get more control, not over every small step, but over what really matters, the results." There was silence in the North Shore conference room after my response to Leon. I felt his face tense slightly. He clearly hadn't expected such a confident parry. "And yet," he continued, not ready to give up, "experience has shown that without strict supervision, employees tend to make, shall we say, rash decisions." I noticed Zoya and Warren exchange quick glances. They understood the implication of the question. "Our system is designed to help you make informed decisions," I replied, trying to keep my voice professional without personal offense. "The algorithm analyzes previous experience, suggests classification options, and predicts results. At the same time, the manager can see all decisions and their justifications in real time. This is not a circumvention of supervision, but a modernization of it." Mr. Coleman, seated at the head of the table, watched our exchange of remarks intently. I saw the corners of his lips lift slightly. "That's an interesting approach," he said, interrupting our dialogue with Leon. "I have another question. How quickly can your system be integrated with our current infrastructure?" Miles enthusiastically undertook to answer the technical question, and I was finally able to take a deep breath. The first round of the confrontation with Leon was up to me, but I knew he wouldn't give up that easily. The presentation continued. Warren talked about the other clients they had already started working with, Zoya presented the financial model, and Miles went into the technical details of the integration. I watched carefully the reactions of those present, especially Leon. He sat tapping his pen on his notepad with an unreadable expression on his face. But I knew the gesture all too well. Leon always did that when something piqued his interest, but he didn't want to show it. After the main presentation, the more detailed questions began. Most of them were directed at Warren and Zoe, but every now and then Leon would insert questions aimed at undermining my confidence. Each of his questions was a thinly disguised attempt to belittle my role and competence. But with each answer, I felt my confidence growing. Something had changed in me during those weeks at Flex Claims. I was no longer the Wendy who was afraid to speak her mind. After nearly 2 hours of discussion, Mr. Coleman finally concluded, "Well, I must say, your proposal is very interesting. We see the potential for cooperation, but we will need time for internal discussions and perhaps additional technical advice." Warren nodded understandingly. "Of course. We are ready to provide any additional information and even organize a pilot project with a limited number of users so that you can evaluate the effectiveness under real conditions." "That's an excellent idea," Mr. Coleman agreed. "Leon, you will coordinate this process from our side." I almost choked. Leon is the project coordinator? That meant I'd have to work with him directly if North Shore agreed to cooperate. Leon put on a professional smile. "Of course, sir. I can already see several areas where we could test the system." After formal farewells and exchange of contacts, we left the North Shore building. I felt a strange mixture of emotions: relief that the presentation was over, pride in my work, and anxiety at the prospect of working with Leon again. "You were great," Warren said as we got into the cab. "Especially the way you handled your former boss's teasing." "It was impressive," Zoya agreed, which was a rare compliment for her. "You didn't give in to provocation, and you handled it like a professional." "Thank you." I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. Praise from people like that meant a lot to me. Though the prospect of working with Leon as coordinator wasn't exactly inspiring. "Don't worry about it," Warren said with a wave of his hand. "If they agree to a pilot project, we won't leave you alone with it. It'll be a team effort." Back at the Flex Claims office, we were greeted by the rest of the team, impatient for news. Dexter, to my surprise, seemed particularly excited. "How'd it go?" he asked as soon as we walked in. "Did they agree?" "Not right away," Warren answered. "But there's clearly interest. They'll consider a pilot project." "And it's all thanks to Wendy," Miles added. "You should have seen how she fought off the attacks of her former boss. A real fighter." I smiled embarrassedly, unaccustomed to such attention. At North Shore, my accomplishments had never been publicly celebrated, and this new dynamic still felt strange. The next few days passed waiting for a response from North Shore. I went back to work on improving the platform, trying not to think about possible collaborations with my former company, and especially interactions with Leon. On Monday morning, Warren called a general meeting. His face shone with joy. "I have great news," he announced. "North Shore has agreed to a pilot project. They will dedicate a corporate customer service department to test our platform for 3 months. Excited whispers swept through the office. This was a significant success. North Shore was one of the largest insurance companies in the region, and their approval could open the door to other large clients. "The first planning meeting for the pilot will be on Wednesday," Warren continued. "Wendy, you'll be the key contact on our end, working with Miles on the implementation." I nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and anxiety. The role was a recognition of my value, but it also meant that I would have to interact with Leon and former colleagues on a regular basis. On Wednesday, I returned to the North Shore building, this time without the same old fear. Leon was waiting for us in the same conference room, in the company of 2 managers from corporate clients. "Miss Harlow, Mr. Chung." He greeted us with formal courtesy. "Let me introduce Rebecca Foster and Alan Mercer, the managers who will be working with you on the pilot project." I recognized Rebecca. We had interacted a few times on complex insurance claims when I worked at North Shore. She smiled slightly at me, while Alan, whom I didn't know, just nodded. The meeting began by discussing the technical details of the integration. Miles took over most of the conversation, explaining how Flex Claims would work with North Shore's existing systems. Leon listened attentively, asking questions from time to time, but, to my surprise, with no apparent attempt to undermine our credibility. When it came to staff training, I took the floor. "We're proposing a 2-day training session for the team, to be conducted by Miles and myself. On the first day, we'll focus on the general principles of the platform, and on the second day, we'll focus on practical cases relevant to corporate clients." Leon raised an eyebrow. "And you consider yourself qualified to conduct such a training session, Miss Harlow?" There it was. I knew he wouldn't miss the opportunity to put me on the spot. "Absolutely, Mr. Malone," I replied calmly. "Over the past month, I've not only learned the platform inside out, but I've been actively involved in its development. In addition, my experience at North Shore gives me a unique insight into the needs of your employees. I know the challenges they face on a daily basis because I have faced them myself for 5 years. Rebecca nodded. That is indeed an advantage. Wendy has always been a good judge of complex cases. I remember how she helped us with that confusing pharmaceutical company case last year. I smiled gratefully at her. It was nice that one of my former colleagues remembered my work in a positive light. Leon was clearly unhappy with this endorsement, but he didn't argue. Good. Then let's set the dates of the training and the composition of the participants. After the meeting, when Miles and I were about to leave, Leon asked me to stay for a minute. Miles looked at me questioningly, but I nodded, letting him know that I could manage on my own. When we were alone, Leon closed the conference room door and turned to me. I have to say, Harlow, I'm impressed. I didn't think you'd find a new job so quickly, especially at a tech startup. There was no sincerity in his voice, just cold appraisal. Life is full of surprises, Mr. Malone, I replied. Sometimes what seems like the end is the beginning of something better. He grinned slightly. Philosophizing? The new job is obviously good for you. But don't forget, this is just a pilot project. There's no guarantee that we'll continue working together after 3 months. I realized he was trying to sow doubt, to undermine my confidence, an old trick that had always worked before. Of course, I agreed. That's why we'll do everything we can to demonstrate the value of our decision. And if North Shore decides not to go ahead, well, there are plenty of other insurance companies in the world that will appreciate the innovation. With those words, I turned and walked out of the conference room, feeling strangely relieved. Leon no longer had power over me, either as a boss or as a source of fear or doubt. Over the next few days, I was fully immersed in preparing for the pilot project. Miles and I designed the training program, while Dexter and his team tailored the platform to North Shore's specific needs. Each evening, I returned home exhausted, but with a sense of fulfillment I had never experienced at North Shore. On Saturday, for the first time in a long time, I decided to give myself a day off. My mom invited me over for lunch, and I accepted. We hadn't seen each other in person in weeks. When I arrived at her small house in the suburbs, she greeted me with unusual enthusiasm. "Wendy, you look different." "Different?" I took off my coat. "In what way?" "I don't know." She scrutinized me. More? Confident? Energized? Something had changed. I smiled. I guess it had. Over lunch, I told her about the latest developments, the presentation at North Shore, the pilot project, my new role on the team. Mom listened attentively, without the usual caveats about risk and instability. Back home in the evening, I stood at the window, looking out at the lights of Evanston. My apartment no longer seemed like a refuge from the world, more like a temporary stop on my way somewhere else. I was even starting to think about moving, perhaps to a neighborhood closer to the Flex Claims office. Of course, not everything was perfect. There was a pilot project to work on with Leon, technical problems that still had to be solved, and inevitable conflicts with Dexter and his team over development priorities. Flex Claims was still a startup with an uncertain future, unlike the stable North Shore Corporation. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. I had found a place where my experience and my voice were valued, a place where I could grow not only as a professional, but also as a person. I didn't know what the future would bring. Startups come and go, projects can take off successfully or fail miserably. But I knew one thing. I was no longer the Wendy Harlow who was afraid to speak her mind, who questioned every decision she made. I had found my voice, and I wasn't going to lose it again.